welcome to the second IPQ debate. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly, also known as IPQ. The IPQ debate is a new format, and the idea is to dive a little deeper into our new issue, which is not so new anymore, actually. It came out at the end of March and has the title Europe's Choice, Europe's Future, focusing on the European parliamentary elections taking place in June and sort of what lies behind this probably pivotal moment for Europe. In this cover section of the spring issue, we wanted to highlight two aspects in particular. The one is Europe's choices, the choice Europeans are going to make in the elections on June 6th to 9th. Pollsters have predicted a surge by the far right, which in Germany at least seems to be less pronounced than feared. The picture, of course, is completely different in France. And the other aspect we wanted to highlight was the question of leadership. Where is the EU headed and who's leading Europe? The very subject of our debate today. And looking for leadership in the EU, the eye naturally wanders to Germany and France, with the UK out of the picture. The government of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has started out in 2019 with the ambition to act only in the European interest and have disappointed many across the continent. And French President Emmanuel Macron recently again underlined his ambition to be the continent's most progressive thinker, but many consider him to lack clout which would sort of enable him to take up this leadership role. So today we want to try and take a fresh look at this question, which is not a new one, who leads Europe? And I've got two excellent guests to kick us off in this debate. I'm very pleased to welcome Jana Puglierin, Senior Policy Fellow and Head of the Berlin Office of the European Council on Foreign Relations, a long-time contributor to IPQ and IP, and a dear former colleague here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Jana. And our second panelist is Jakob Ross, the DGAP's Research Fellow for France and Franco-German Relations, also a regular contributor. And we want to start off this debate by both our speakers focusing a little on the articles from the magazine. Jana's article was titled, or is titled, Germany Needs to Recover its European Spirit. And you find it on the website right now. We sort of re-upped, as one says, today, the two articles. And Jakob Ross' article is called France's Pivot to Europe. Incidentally, both of our authors are presently in the IPQ most read top 3, but not with these two articles, but with other articles that have contributed in the meantime. Jakob with an assessment of Macron's second Sorbonne speech, and Jana writing on the concept of a dormant NATO. Please check these out as well. But today we want to start, or would look at European leadership, and we start with Jana, please.
Thank you, Henning. I didn't know that we made it into the top 3 with our other articles, so that's very good news and made my day already. Thank you very much for joining this call and for listening. I have to start maybe with a caveat. So my story that I'm going to tell here is maybe a bit the story of a broken heart and of a lot of expectations that were not fulfilled. Maybe I was overly ambitious in the very beginning. And you can tell me later that basically my judgment is not totally or entirely legitimate. But it starts basically with me reading very enthusiastically right after this coalition came into office, the coalition agreement. When I read it, I was very, very pleased to see the prominent role that the European Union played. I think it was one of the most ambitious European policies ever adopted by an incoming government. And it clearly signaled a willingness to end Germany's status quo orientation that we've seen for so long under Angela Merkel, and basically the end of this technocratic approach where you were only willing to fix small things here and there, but basically not to challenge the whole setup and the whole the whole principal architecture. I thought we were seeing something more ambitious, Germany in more of a shaping role, but with a European spirit, because the commitment to Europe, to the EU, to European sovereignty was such a recurrent theme in the coalition agreement. And I know from experience that you should never take basically what's written on paper for granted. It's a coalition agreement, but nevertheless, also looking at the parties, I was just ready for change. I think in there was the pledge to take especially the coordination of EU policy within Germany to a new level. That was one of the promises that I welcomed most, and to take, as a government, a clear and early position on the European Commission's projects. And it also gave a very prominent role to the EU when it came to foreign security, development, and trade policies, which were supposed to be based on a common European interest. So that's my starting point, and I was really excited to see the new government coming in and laying out such ambitious plans. I also, maybe not totally legitimate, but I thought that basically the Green Party took all the Coreper 1 and 2 portfolios, and they are kind of, their nature is so pro-European that I really thought, together with the SPD, at least they could, that something more progressive could come out of it. When I look at the outcome, though, as I said, I'm a bit, or mildly, or even a bit more disappointed. Because I think first, we don't see any better coordination of Germany's European policy. It takes very long most of the time. Germany has changed its mind recurrently at a very late stage, and the German vote is back. And yeah, so I think we're not doing great on EU coordination within the government. I think it is becoming obvious how difficult it is to govern with 3 coalition partners, and that basically, because there is no agreement, you take that to the EU level, and then Germany cannot play the strong role that I wanted it to play. I think it's in the nature of this government, where the parties come from, questions also of kind of financing things, but nevertheless, I was more hopeful. Also, when it comes to a shaping role, especially under the circumstances of a major land war in Europe and what we call Zeitenwende, I thought that Germany would be more forward-leaning and would take more often the initiative and basically try to shape the EU's reaction to Russia's war of aggression. But I think there is a lot of Merkel in Scholz, actually. When you read the Prague speech that Scholz gave, you see that he, and maybe that's also part of the DNA, but very much sees Germany as the country at the heart of Europe, the old, basically central power, and as a unifying force that should bring together East, West, North, and South. And all that is fine, and this is Germany's traditional role, and one that Merkel has always emphasized. But I think there is too much of this honest broker in there. With that, and I think that's just something that we don't fulfill. And in the coalition treaty, coming back to the document again, there was this promise that we want to define German interests in the light of European interests. And I think, especially when you look at, Germany's actions, I think many countries, many of our partners don't see that and have the impression that it has been very often Germany first. And I give some examples for this. But so I have 2 issues with this kind of north, south, east, west, bringing it together. So I see often a lack of a of an orientation towards a European interest, but I also think that Germany is actually not doing enough what it did in the past, listening to small countries and really trying to be the unifying force and bringing countries together, because that is the definition of leadership, how I understand it, that Olaf Scholz has in mind when he talks about leadership. He talks about, in German, zusammenführen, which has two dimensions, basically leading together with others and never leading alone, but also bringing partners together, bringing actors together. And I think especially on the last one, I think Germany has basically been underperforming in fulfilling its traditional role. And I get this impression when talking to other Europeans that basically have repeatedly emphasized in the past months that they miss Merkel, not because Merkel was so great, but because Merkel was the spider in the web and the indispensable force to who had the power to bring countries together. Anyhow, what I take issue with, and this is often also predominantly a lack of clear communication and not so much kind of a wrong policy that I take issue with, but is, for example, when you look back at the Doppelbums, the double whammy, where Germany basically put 200 billion euro to the table for the Germans to compensate them for the higher energy prices. Other countries saw it as an unfair distortion of the EU's single market. There was even an op-ed, I think in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung by Breton and Gentiloni, accusing Germany of causing a European subsidies race. And although many other countries have done basically the same thing at a lower scale, I think the way Germany communicated it and did it backfired quite significantly. Another policy area where I think that it's more Germany first than Europe first is China policy. And here again, I think we see something that we've seen under Angela Merkel as well. So this idea that there is this special relationship between Germany and China. And I think this government, or I hoped, would basically try to undo some of this and to Europeanize its approach. But when I look at, I mean, not only the visits are just visits, but I am wondering why for the second time it was not possible to organize something kind of more collectively, or why the German business delegation that went with the chancellor both times was only German, and not why other European companies at least could have joined, or why it was not possible to synchronize basically state visits and the kind of why that was not better coordinated in the Franco-German tandem. And I know for a fact that at least for the first time, Olaf Scholz wanted to go on his own for his first state visit, which is maybe understandable, but I still think it would have been a great signal to have kind of them jointly visiting, or have both of them in Paris together with Ursula von der Leyen. Although I understand that it's awkward so shortly after Scholz has been to Beijing. Also, the Costco decision, now Germany's opposition, barely hidden opposition towards the anti-subsidy investigation that the EU Commission leads, its reluctance to see to see the Commission going forward on this, its reluctance when it comes to the idea of decoupling, de-risking, sorry, I understand every skepticism towards decoupling, but so it's, I think I'm confused because Scholz did not really talk about de-risking, but he talked about decoupling, which is, I think, distracting from what we really need to do. So last 2 points that I think are problematic, and I'm just highlighting some. I think the Zeitenwende is too transatlanticist in its orientation and lacks a European dimension. And I'm a committed transatlanticist myself. I have nothing against this, but I think it's it's not balanced, it's too short-sighted. It basically counts on the Biden administration being in office forever. And basically you see these close links and kind of Scholz looking very much towards what the White House does in very many kind of single decisions. But what I miss is basically kind of a stronger coordination with European partners. I think, like when you think Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, afterwards we saw some European initiatives led by France and Germany. And this time we see a major disruption in the European security order. And I'm just missing action. The Commission tries to do stuff like the ammunition initiative, like EDIRPA, now EDIS, the strategy. But Germany is not really behind this. Germany thinks it's nice to have these things and it's not doing any bigger damage, or Germany tries very much to prevent these things from becoming too big and having any real impact. But it's not really getting behind it. It's not shaping it. It's not approaching this constructively. And I can give you examples, but maybe I'm already too long. But just to give you an example how Germany, I think, understands the future of European security and defense, and its role is basically the European Sky Shield Initiative. So Germany takes a decision and invites others to follow and opens its contracts and leads, which we can discuss and has also its advantages, but it's not very. It's basically an ex post coordination with allies. It's the decision is taken beforehand and then others are invited. And with the ammunition initiative, Germany wanted to have its own consortium, not joining basically the EU-led one. And yeah, so there are many kind of small examples for this. And what I think, or what worries me most is the Franco-German disagreements. I think it's a myth to think that this relationship has ever been only kind of glorious and productive. But I think lately I'm really worried because we see both countries basically being on different paths on fundamental questions when it comes to European defense, but especially also China. And I would really feel much better also looking at November if the Franco-German tandem would be more powerful and more in sync again. And I'm really hoping that the Weimar Triangle brings some progress. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jana. It's a long sort of list of things Scholz and his government in its European policy is getting wrong. And I'm sure we want to come back to various aspects of it. I'm glad you say that sort of you sort of worried or as a journalist and editor, I'm pleased you say the Franco-German relationship worries you, because that's the focus of our next issue in summer. But before I get ahead of myself, let's get Jakob in. When Jana said a moment ago that the Zeitenwende is missing its European dimension, I think lots of people in Paris will have nodded and said, "Mais oui." That's exactly one of the big problems. But Jakob, please, I would like to invite you to sketch out your article on French leadership.
Thank you, Henning, and Jana, and all listeners who tune in at that time of afternoon. And indeed, I mean, the last points you made, Jana, on the deception, not only with German leadership within the European context, but on the Franco-German couple specifically, is indeed a perfect transition. That has been something that has been discussed in Franco-German relations ever since the Scholz government took office in 2021. And that's something that for the French side, I try to describe encompass in my piece for IPQ in the spring issue, namely the impression on the European level that when it comes to European leadership at the moment, France and President Macron more specifically have the ideas, but they lack the trust of their European partners. Germany is first and foremost under Chancellor Scholz, and they increasingly lack the resources to implement these ideas. Resources that are very present or could be present in Berlin and on the German side that Germany possesses, but unfortunately, and on that point, I completely agree with your assessment, Jana. There are no big ideas, or at least not in action. I mean, we see them in the coalition treaty, very ambitious, but they are not being implemented by the current German government. So there's kind of a leadership paradox at the moment in Europe. Now, I think this impression is not only mine. This has been argued by many others, including in other pieces in IPQ. Joseph de Weck and Michel Duclos, a former French ambassador, recently wrote in IPQ on this particular problem of Franco-German relations. They wrote about the specific example of aid or support of Ukraine's war effort. Joseph and Ambassador Duclos put it like this, and I wanted to quote this because I find this quote very precise and telling. France is good at deterrence with regards to Ukraine, but it lacks the financial resolve. Germany has a frightening wallet, but is terrible at making threats. And I think the recent reactions of Chancellor Scholz to Putin's nuclear threats is a case in point for this argument. Now, to focus on Macron and on France, which were indeed the focus of the article, I think that President Macron is still 7 years after he took office trying to push his European vision of greater sovereignty, of independence, a vision that he developed before entering office and then presented to the European public, not least in his first Sorbonne speech in September 2017. At the end of April of this year, so only 2 weeks ago, he then gave his second Sorbonne speech, which was echoing to a certain degree the first one. And the core message of these two speeches and of the 7 years of his presidency now remain the same. The European Union needs to deepen its integration. It needs to strengthen its sovereignty with regards to defense policies, industrial policy, particularly in the arms industry, against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine. With regards to the common market, common European Union budgets, and investments in key technologies for the future. So this remains the same, but the tone in which this vision was presented by Macron in 2017 and now again in late April has very much changed. And this became very clear, I think, in the reactions both to the Sorbonne speech that Macron gave and to the interview, the very long interview he gave to The Economist just last week. Macron's vision of the European Union, of European sovereignty, is much darker nowadays. I think it's not as positive and optimistic, enthusiastic like it used to be or was in 2017 when he was elected the youngest and most pro-European French president in history. Now it seems like it is more of an urgent call for action with regards to the inaction on the European level. It's a call of a seasoned international statesman who's beginning to be an elder statesman, who has witnessed the degradation of the European Union's place in international relations and who fears that, and I quote again from his Sorbonne speech, Europe or the European civilization might die. Now, as I said in the beginning, I think that Macron still has many ideas to counter this tendency to stop Europe from dying, as he put it in very dramatic terms. But his problem is, again, that most of his partners within the European Union do not entrust him or any French president, for that matter, with this new design or deepening of the European Union. And I think that Macron has understood this, that he's deceived, that he's angry to a certain degree. And I think this anger and the sense of urgency, again, became very apparent in his Sorbonne speech and in the interview with The Economist. To me, at least, this is also one of the main drivers or explications for the currently poor state of the Franco-German relationship, a relationship that has deteriorated since the Scholz government, the coalition government, took office in 2021. I think that back in 2017, back then in partnership with Angela Merkel, Jana has touched upon this, Merkel as the clear leading figure in European politics. Macron had the impression coming in to office for his first term that the German government and Angela Merkel personally were on his page with regards to European sovereignty and his ideas. This has changed. There's now a very strong feeling in France, not only in the Élysée, but also in the foreign ministry, in the defense ministry, the National Assembly, in Parliament, in Paris, that Germany's positions on European sovereignty, again, as Jana put it, are very much back to a very strong transatlanticism, always looking to the White House, to what the Biden administration is doing, and kind of taking back the compromises that were forged by Merkel and Macron back in 2017 against the backdrop at the time of the Trump presidency and of Brexit. Now, you could say, as Jana did, that Macron's heart and France's heart is broken as well with regards to Chancellor Scholz and the German positions. There are now huge differences in the outlook, long-term outlook. If you, again, look at the transatlantic relationship, the future of European security, the relationship to China, that became very clear. President Xi was in France for a state visit for the past 2 days. There were lots of discussions. Maybe we can come back to that as well in the discussion. And I think that Macron blames Scholz personally to a certain degree because his election in 2021 and the coalition treaty that Jana referred to raised many hopes in Paris as well. I think that the hearts are also broken in France because expectations were so high. Let's remember that it was Scholz at the time as finance minister of Angela Merkel who talked about a Hamiltonian moment when the next generation European Union Common Fund was set up in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. Huge win from a French perspective in terms of deepening European integration, having more money in common budgets, and the fact that Scholz now, or the coalition government, seems very reluctant to go forward in that direction, that they seem to stick to the position that this was a one-off and they don't want to have a common, bigger budget and room for more investment in future technologies. For instance, something that Macron referred to consistently in his Sorbonne speech is a very big deception for now in Paris. Now, to come to an end, I think Macron is very conscious of the fact that he has exactly 3 years left in his presidency. He can't be re-elected in 2027, which gives him a certain freedom, I think, to express his ideas, a freedom that Chancellor Scholz certainly does not have. He's facing elections next year. But it also urges him, Macron, to put into action the vision that he has presented and defended since 2017, because, and that's really the last point, I think Emmanuel Macron is certainly somebody who is already having an eye on the history books and who wants to defend a European legacy when he leaves the Élysée Palace in Paris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob. We are already almost approaching the 30-minute line. So please, sort of, if you want to get into the debate, please do so by raising your hand and in a perfect way, sort of put your question in person to the panel. But while you're maybe thinking about what we would like to add to the conversation, let's go back to Jana for a moment. Jakob spoke of this leadership paradox, and it seems striking that France with Macron seems to be wanting to lead, but lacking the resources and the trust, whereas Germany probably has the resources, maybe also the trust, but is is not willing to play this role apparently, and Scholz sort of through this whole crisis also over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Scholz has always given this kind of impression that he just doesn't want to take up this role which so many people have expected him to play. But if you go back to the coalition agreement, as you have done so, and the Hamiltonian interview he gave as finance minister, where do you think has he sort of left, or where did he lost the sort of confidence which would be necessary to play this role so many people have hoped he would play?
I'm not able to read Scholz's mind, and would maybe, although I think it's also a matter of personality, but would focus on three other aspects that I think explain a bit of where Germany is and how it acts. I think, or I could imagine that the government, I mean, was very ambitious when it came into office and had a clear plan. Every party had its own project within the government, and it was all focused on basically Germany, or the reform of Germany domestically, energy transition, green transition, infrastructure. So Germany was in a way on a path, and then the full invasion of Ukraine by Russia happened, and I think it took Germany very much by surprise. That's always difficult to understand when I talk to Americans or Brits, because they said the signs were on the wall for so long and we've told you. But from personal experience, I can really testify that in Berlin, many, until the very last moment, I think until Putin gave this speech where he basically accepted the independence of these additional basically territories 2 days before the war started, or 3. People thought this would not happen, and I think they really were not prepared. And it took the government by surprise and absorbed a lot of energy because it questioned so much of Germany's fundamental orientation, its role as a still somewhat civilian power, although we had come a long way already with the German army being more and more engaged also globally. But still, this kind of fundamental belief that war was banned from Europe after Yugoslavia fell apart. And also this belief that, I mean, you can put it very simply and say change through trade, but I think it was really not only kind of greed that led to this policy. It was the deep belief that through interdependence and trade relations, one could stabilize international politics and would prevent others kind of from waging wars, because that's how I also was socialized. I always questioned this, but people always told me, well, look, even during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was a reliable supplier for energy, and Nord Stream 2 is a good project. And so I think so. From a German perspective, I think many fundamental beliefs needed to be revisited and crumbled. And I think the government was to a certain extent overwhelmed for a long time. And then plus, and that's my second point, the budget constraints. I think this is also something, and it's the special constellation of this government. It's the fact that we have a finance minister who is kind of part of a party which is opposed to higher taxes or any additional taxes, but also is very much opposed against questioning the Black Zero and more debt. Whereas on the other hand, you have the Social Democrats and the Greens, who are not ready to cut, for example, the social budget drastically. So you have And then you have the verdict of the German Constitutional Court. And I think Germany now finds itself in a position that it hasn't been in for a long time, that it's not really lacking money and cannot throw money at the problem to basically, yeah, kind of to take the edges away. And I think more and more, to a certain extent, we witness the end of German exceptionalism, which I think is a progress that had started before. We've seen this under Gerhard Schröder and even under Merkel. So it's a less of an emotional attachment to the European Union. It's more and more Germany becoming a normal country, looking maybe at maybe the pros of the coalition treaty in that way is more the exception than kind of what Germany does at the moment, I think. And then plus, and that brings me to the Chancellor himself, there is an anecdote that I heard from someone who was participating in that ceremony to honor Jacques Delors, where basically Scholz was sitting there and not talking to anybody whilst Alexander De Croo and Kaja Kallas hugged basically over his head. And to me, that was a bit telling, because that's what I hear very often, that there is kind of personality of our Chancellor is not to engage with everybody, to laugh and to kind of make bonds, but kind of very hard to get to. And maybe that's also an additional problem.
Thank you very much, Jana. And we've got the first hand up by Mathieu. Before you come in, though, one question from the chat. Maybe you would respond to what Jana said anyway. This is the question, sort of how this discrepancy between Macron's rhetoric and the French support for Ukraine, which is coming up quite a lot of times and also today. So maybe you could answer that question.
And since Mathieu has his hand up already, and I know that there's French diplomats in the room, I will take the French position in defense, so to say, of France's leadership aspirations or Macron's leadership aspirations within the European context, with regards to the criticism to looking at the numbers of weapon deliveries. The Kiel tracker that had been ongoing at the beginning of the year are now much more out of the public debate, which is probably a good thing for Franco-German relations. But I mean, first of all, and that's a very profane reason to a certain degree, is budget constraints. Jana talked about this for the German context, you know, the Schwarze Null and the German fetishism to a certain degree with a balanced budget. In France, I mean, France is running a deficit of more than 5% for the last year. French officials in Bercy, in the Ministry of Finance and Economics, are very afraid of the rating agencies. They could lower their grades for French sovereign debt. So there's simply very little room for maneuver, really, to put out great sums for more purchases for Ukraine. A second, more positive argument, if you speak to the French, is that France is leading with regards to rhetorics, you know, no red lines, ground troops in Ukraine. So France is pushing forward a debate that is often very much constrained by the German side. Yes, Germany is delivering more, but at the same time does not want to go all in, so to say, seems to be afraid of Russian reactions, very prone to Russian threats, both conventional and then nuclear, as we saw again these past days. Whereas France is adding to European security through its own nuclear deterrence, is capable of doing things and saying things that the German Chancellor can't. Another argument which is convincing, to my mind at least, is that France has in the past defended European security in other places than in Ukraine. If you look at Western Africa, the progress of jihadi groups and basically undoing many states in the Sahel, France was the only country who was willing and capable to intervene. This cost a lot of money, but also a lot of lives of French soldiers. Germany was not capable or willing to send soldiers in combat mission in these regions. So France has done more in the past, has more engagements due to its own territories all over the world. So it's not capable of focusing as much on Ukraine and NATO's eastern flank as Germany probably is. So I think that there is a certain discrepancy between the rhetorics of Macron on European sovereignty and the unwillingness to really focus on Ukraine, to go all in, to focus on the French presence and French engagement on the eastern flank. But I think there's very good counter arguments if you listen closely to the French side with regards to French security engagements, not only in Eastern Europe, but all over the world.
Thank you very much. And with that, let's get in our first participant. Mathieu, please. Could you introduce yourself and then make your point?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon or good morning from where I stand in Washington, DC. So I'm a visiting fellow at CSIS. Thanks for the fascinating conversation so far. It's always great to have these discussions. So when we talk leadership of Europe, obviously the discussions leads us to the Franco-German couple, or so-called Franco-German engine. But I think both panelists really clearly emphasize how the two countries have differently failed to seize the leadership or seize the moment of the war in Ukraine to really promote their leadership capacity, and it has rather undermined their credibility. So I guess in the new Europe that is emerging post, I mean, in the context of the war in Ukraine, I think we see a Europe where I think the Franco-German impulsion is still needed, but probably less desired than before. It's probably a more multipolar Europe that is emerging as well. We see new capitals such as Warsaw who aspire to play a more prominent role. We also see London that is giving signs of trying to reconnect with the continent. So, and we see, as Jana mentioned, the Weimar Triangle giving signs also of rejuvenating. So my question is, looking ahead, looking beyond the Franco-German engine, which in the current configuration, we hardly see how it can deliver. What could be a new formula, perhaps more collective for leadership in Europe?
Thank you very much. Jana, do you want to respond?
Yeah, can I also take the question by David, I think it is, Fouquet? Because I think it's an important point. When you look at Twitter, you get the impression that it's kind of everything that goes wrong in Germany is solely Olaf Scholz's fault. And I think that is misleading. And the question, I think, points into the right direction. I think there are certain things that a chancellor needs to do and that Scholz doesn't do. I think when it comes to taking leadership also within the coalition and pushing it, I think he could do better. And there are certain decisions that he has taken against his two coalition partners, for example, not to deliver the Taurus. You cannot blame the Greens or the FDP for that. You can blame them for not leaving the coalition, but that is very much his own decision. So but in general, I think the question is very right. We see for the first time this coalition of the three parties. I mean, if you count the CDU-CSU still as somewhat one. And this is not a marriage out of love. Initially, I think it could have worked well because all three parties had this kind of domestic project, and there was enough money available. There was a plan how to use the money that was not spent during Corona for new investments. They could circumvent basically the debt brake. And I think there was a base. Now, And it gets harder and harder, I think. We've seen this already with the budget negotiations 2024. I think we see it now with the budget negotiations 2025, that this coalition needs to square basically a circle or a triangle. So we have the need for more spending. We not only defense spending, but in also infrastructure, digitalization, everything that government wanted to do originally is still, I think, very urgent. Plus, we need a lot of new money that we had not planned for. And so we can finance it either through new debt or new taxes or new cuts. And in this coalition, it seems to be impossible or very difficult to find an agreement. And there's also a reluctance by politicians to let their projects go and to make sacrifices. And they also, I think, all of them don't communicate enough to the German population that something needs to give. That I think originally, even after the war started, the idea was to basically do the whole Zeitenwende at the sidelines, so that the German citizen would not feel the change so much and would not be burdened with it. Now, I think we will face a very difficult situation in Germany because there needs to be prioritization, and citizens will feel the implications of all of this. And it's not clear that the mandate for the Zeitenwende remains, because there are other parties now, especially the AfD, being very strong, but also the new parties like Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, with a very different idea on the fundamental principles of foreign and security and defense policy, an opposition to the European Union, questioning of NATO, kind of questioning actually the whole Zeitenwende. And so I think the government is in a very difficult situation. I don't envy any one of them. They need to live with each other. They need to remain somewhat constructively. They don't know how to forge a compromise. And so I think it's not only Olaf Scholz, although for some decisions, I think he's solely responsible. Coming to Mathieu's question about the format, so I'm not ready to give up Weimar as outdated. I think Weimar is not enough, of course, but Weimar, I hope, brings us forward, because previously, in the triangle, there was one leg that was not very strong, and that was always the relationship between France and Poland. So Germany and France had a very close relationship, and Germany and Poland, but France and Poland less so. And I think in this triangle now, there are interesting new alliances and interesting new joint interests. For example, I think Poland and France are much closer when it comes to Ukraine and how to move forward to each other than to Germany. And so I think that maybe to work it out, the three of them could be what previously the Franco-German tandem was always supposed to be, kind of to be a bridge that is wide enough to be acceptable, or when a compromise is found to be acceptable for others. I think, as I said, the Weimar Triangle is by far not enough, but I hope I'm right, but a readiness by countries to make it work, because what I also sense in Germany is there is a realization that we need to work more on a European level and with other partners. And it's not only that it hasn't worked with France, it has not, I mean, there is no other very obvious close candidate for Germany that has replaced France. So I think Weimar, and then opening it up on specific topics for other member states, is a good starting point. I would be already satisfied if something came out of the meeting in May, and then in the next months.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Jana. Jakob, do you also want to come in on this? Mathieu sort of mentioned the UK. We are looking forward to elections in Britain, probably in September, with a Labour government getting ready, which is making signals that they want to closer again. And we've got in the issue also a piece by John Kampfner, who's actually making this point that this is a whole of a UK-shaped hole, in especially if you look at security and defense issues. Do you see any sort of point in that, sort of extending the Weimar Triangle with the UK? Is that helpful, or would it sort of complicate things even more, doing this with someone with a country which is now outside of the EU?
Well, I'm always a bit hesitant because I'm old school in the sense that I really focus on the Franco-German relationship and maybe not as much as I should on Weimar or trilateral relationships with Washington, with London. But indeed, I mean, the signals that Macron gave in the interview with The Economist, probably also due to the fact that he was talking to British journalists, but I mean, still was very much that the British are still to this day, and despite, you know, the Treaty of Aachen and very close bilateral relationships between France and Germany, the prime partner for European security for France. There's the Lancaster House treaties from 2010 that never really lived up to the expectations. But I mean, there's a solid basis there, I guess, that could be picked up upon by a new British government. And as you said, Henning, I think the shadow foreign minister from the Labour Party reacted very positively to some of the things that Macron stated in the Sorbonne speech and then in the interview with the Economist again. So maybe something will move on this front. On Weimar so far, I mean, we've discussed this at DGAP with other colleagues who are more knowledgeable of Eastern Europe, Milan Nitsch, for instance. So far, it seems a lot like communication. I mean, that there hasn't been big announcements or progress coming out of the meeting of the heads of states and governments in Berlin. You had the meetings in Paris of the foreign ministers that committed to a stronger stance, common stance against Russian disinformation and propaganda, also with regards to election processes, the European elections in the beginning of June. But I think, and I mean, this might be, again, a bit old school and 20th century thinking, but I think the Franco-German relationship is very much at the heart, and you can't really work around this, not in a Europe of 6 or 12 and not in a Europe of 27. There's people who see this differently, but I think that the fact that the current tensions between Paris and Berlin have evidently so much impact in Brussels. If you look at energy policy, the defense policy, the general being incapable of implementing big reforms, launching reform progresses, speaks to the fact that this Franco-German relationship or engine or couple is still very much at the heart, and you can add other partners, but if you don't have the two together, and probably at the very head between the Chancellery and the Élysée, there is a problem. So, I mean, not very optimistic, sorry, but
thank you very much. Jana wants to come in with two fingers. And we've got one question in the chat, which we haven't sort of addressed yet, by Mark Scheeland, who I summed this up sort of whether the German public actually goes along with this sort of this new era and has sort of waved goodbye to a thinking about the world in which everything is more or less sort of can be addressed by peaceful means and solutions to be found by negotiations and diplomacy, which is something which comes up in German debate time and time again. That there needs to be more diplomacy around Ukraine and others. Maybe you want to speak to that for a second, Jana, and then I've got a final question for you too, and then I'm afraid we have to close.
Yeah, I actually had a two-finger on Jakob, coming back to Mathieu, because it just came to my mind. 2 points that I, as an observer, found interesting in the past 2 years. First, how von der Leyen's role got stronger and how she developed her position as president of the European Commission. I mean, without the buy-in of the member states, she cannot achieve anything. That is clear. But on Ukraine, but also on China, I think she has been very ambitious in developing a European approach that was not the lowest common denominator, but quite ambitious. And she tried to push member states and bring them on board. And in a way, I would say she is a stronger leader than Jean-Claude Juncker was. Also more controversial, but when it comes to European leadership and who can basically forge coalitions, I think von der Leyen's development is just interesting. And then what I also find interesting, cannot replace the Franco-German tandem, but the dynamic that we've seen between the Baltic states and the Nordics, especially in the first year of the war. Maybe it was exaggerated to talk about the center of Europe shifting to the east, but what I nevertheless thought was that in a moment where Germany also had a problem to lead because its old Russia approach was so much discredited and it was in this soul-searching phase, I think that the Baltic states and Finland and the respective leaders and heads of state and government have achieved a lot. Like, they have led the discussions, they have pushed constantly for more, they have annoyed, I think, the German government quite a bit, and maybe there was a bit too much of Germany bashing, and without Germany and France, nothing really moves. But I also found this an interesting observation. Now, very briefly to Mark's question on, have we learned? I think we did, looking at public polls, but also the support still for the Zeitenwende and support for Ukraine. I think that maybe the problem with, I don't know, Germany being or having difficulties with military aspects of its security policy was more an elite problem, because there is strong support, I think, for the German Bundeswehr. And I think the recent Internationale Politik also had a poll on this. So the Germans are willing to support the German armed forces. They want a more European approach. They see Russia as a threat. I think that is really not comparable to where we've been at the end of 2021. Perception has really changed. And of course, you see how difficult it is for some actors that have been socialized in a very different environment with a very different mindset to cope with the new realities. They struggle. Rolf Mützenich, for example, I think visibly struggles and is questioning how much he needs really to shift and how much of his old beliefs is still valid. I think there is also a fear that now there is a tendency to throw everything that was also good about basically Germany's foreign policy in the past out with the bathwater. So we see maybe... But I think by and large, I'm actually impressed by how much public support there is for the Zeitenwende.
Thank you very much. And just to give you the figure, this is about the latest IP4 question, asking basically sort of in with Trump sort of already sort of the shadow of Trump already over NATO. Would you support a higher defense spending across Europe? And 68% of those we asked were in favor of that, which is an impressive number, I think, and shows you that maybe the public in Germany is ahead of the government and of the parties. We've got only 3 minutes left, unfortunately. Jana has already sort of alluded a little bit to what will happen next. We'll have a European Parliament election. We'll have a new commission, which might be headed by the same person as it is at the moment. And I wanted to ask you very, very briefly for your hunch. Is there a chance for a reboot? Will this election and then the building of a new commission give this kind of sort of spark to the EU, which it desperately needs? Or do you think, well, it might not? Maybe we start with Jana and then Jakob has the last word.
Let's start with Jakob. I've talked so much.
Okay, then switch it around.
I mean, if you look at the European elections and speculate about the next commission coming from France or listening to the French, it's again a very sobering debate. If you look at current polling in France, Macron's party, and not only his party, but also his allies, poll at around 16 to 18%, and the right-wing extremists from Rassemblement National are at 30 to 32, so nearly double the figures. So, I mean, Macron's parties and the pro-European French say in the next European Parliament will be drastically diminished. There will be a lot more right-wingers who will try to shape the European agenda for sure. If you look at the Rassemblement National's party program that just got published, they take up all the talk about European sovereignty, but they interpret it in a very different way. They say we have to bring back the nation state to the front. We have to get back to the Gaullist ideal of a Europe of nation states. We have to fight Brussels and the reach out of Brussels above its competencies. So, I mean, I want to be optimistic. I really would like to see more Sorbonne speeches and more European debate, more big ideas discussed. And I think that's really lacking, and including mostly for young voters, for voters who are going to vote for the first time, maybe in June, because we are so much on the defensive, always discussing the Politik crisis and this and that, and Europe is losing pace and is kind of falling from one crisis into another, that I really think that we need a positive outlook and a big vision to get people on board. Otherwise, I think that these young voters will grow up politically with a European Union in crisis, with a European Union that is not capable of implementing change, of deeper integration. And I think that's a huge problem, because the European Union, and this will be a huge problem to solve for the next Commission, the European Union has always prospered because it was moving forward, because it could show that European solutions were best. And that's not the impression, unfortunately, that we get at the moment. So I try to be optimistic, but again, from a French perspective, it's hard.
And Jana, your heart was already broken by Scholz.
No, just I mean, let's not exaggerate with my broken heart. I try. I mean, I just hope that the European election will not lead to a decisive kind of move to the right or to the far right, that it will be still possible to find, or that the center holds, and that it will be possible to form a coalition kind of from the center. And I hope actually that, I mean, there is a major war in Europe that is, for me, fundamentally questioning the European security order, or has basically put it to pieces. And then there is, as I said, the prospect that we see another catastrophe for Europe in office in November. I mean, maybe that is not a done deal. It's 50-50, too close to call. But I think that looking at the future, so many events should tell us that there is only basically a European way to dealing with these problems and not a nationalistic way. I know that the counter forces are strong, but I still believe in, I don't know, people coming to their senses and seeing that in the end we can deal only kind of with the fallout of the United States, possibly, and even under Biden, maybe a reduced role in Europe, only if we organize ourselves better collectively. I still believe that these ideas resonate with people, and that because of the urgency, because of the crises, the EU will emerge stronger, and the Europeans also, maybe together with the UK and other formats, but collectively.
Thank you very much. And with that, I bring this second IPQ debate to a close. Thank you very much, our two panelists, Jakob Ross and Jana Puglierin. Thank you all for attending today. If you liked what you saw, tell your friends that there will be a recording available at the DGAP YouTube channel at some point. We'll point you via our social media outlets to that. Have another look at our spring issue. Please vote in June and maybe not for the extremists, if I may be so bold. And with that, I wish you a very good day and see you soon at IPQ and the German Council on Foreign Relations.